The reality of it is I got banged up more actually by doing stunts and, jumping around and flying off things and getting trampled by horses and all of this kind of the car accidents that you have when you do stunts. And so I think to be careful when you're 20 years old, oh, you don't want to lift that heavy or you shouldn't do this or that. I think it's pretty much a waste. Oh, you ever ask a question?
No, we didn't yet.
No, now
Why not?
we're starting off now. We were taking a nap, but we're not taking a nap anymore because Arnold Schwarzenegger is with us, and everybody asked you about your muscles. We want to talk to you a little bit about your joints today. In your 20s, I'm sure you never even thought about your joints, but I'm curious when you started thinking about joint issues and joint pain or had any soreness there.
Well, in 1972, I had my first surgery, which was on my knee. I had a knee surgery, and I think that's when I kind of had experienced the beginning of major injuries during my career. And then of course there was shoulder injuries, and then there were hip injuries, and then there was hip replacement, knee, elbows, everything else you can think of. And then of course having been a heart patient for the last kind of 30 years. I'd had open heart surgery 3 times, valve replacements, all of those kind of things. So it's like a mechanical man.
When you started training and you first felt it, did you think you could train around it? Or did you try to train through it? What got you to kind of the point where you needed to have surgery?
Well, because in South Africa, I literally tore my ACL and my kneecap moved to the outside, and it was like a major injury that I got on stage in South Africa. And so when I came, they gave me some shots down there. Then when I came back, I got in the surgery, and it was a really good surgery, I have to say, because now after all of these years, I'm still walking on the same knee, and then it's still held up. So it was really great work by the doctor.
So if people are having these kinds of issues like what you've had, what kinds of solutions do you see as available to people that you would recommend?
Well, it really depends on what the injury is. I'm not an expert in analyzing that. I just know, and I'm a big believer that there are a lot of people out there that have pain and don't know what to do. So it could be something minor where you can get therapy. It could be something more intense where you need surgery. And it could be something that is even more intense than that, where you need a replacement of a certain part. If it is the hips, if it is the shoulders, if it's the elbow, if it's the ankles, whatever it is. As you probably have heard, Zimmer, the company, there's not one single body part that they don't make. So, you have now the luxury of replacing that, and you have the experts all over the world that are doing those replacements. And so to me, it's always kind of like letting people know that they shouldn't fear to go in that step, because what is important is that we solve those problems right away. So you don't run around for a year with pain because you start limiting yourself in the kind of things that you're doing. You all of a sudden don't walk as much anymore, you don't bicycle anymore, you don't work out with the weights anymore, and you just limit yourself when in fact you can go and have this fixed, this part. If it is a shoulder replacement or hip replacement. I remember when I got my hip replaced, I in no time was working out again, and that very same winter I was skiing again. So the idea is that you fix whatever the problem is so you can go back to your regular life and enjoy your life.
I want to ask you a little bit, because I feel like all three of us came up, lifting heavy, and you're taught you lift heavy to build muscle, right? Do you ever look back on the lifting you did and wonder if, to some extent, the fact that you were going so heavy led to some of the joint issues? And how do you kind of find that balance from a training standpoint between lifting heavy so you build the muscle, but you don't bug the joints?
I don't think there's such a thing as like, if you want to compete and if you want to be the best in the world, then you can forget about that. What is too heavy? What is too much? Because you just have to, take it that there could be, not that there has to be, but there could be some side effects of that you later on will have to get some of those parts replaced or operated on or fixed in one way or the other. So, there's a lot of people that have those knee injuries or back injuries or hip injuries or shoulder injuries from heavy lifting. And but I would not go back now and say, oh, I shouldn't have squatted that much, I shouldn't have deadlifted that much or anything like that.
So I feel like it's always kind of interesting, just the whole joint discussion, because I think like I'm really interested for you too, because I think like when you're in your 20s, like you're just trying to build muscle, you don't think about any of that stuff, right? Like how do your joints feel now these days?
Pushing yourself to the ultimate limits is probably the most valid point that there is. Okay. Yeah. Like zoom out, think about other sports, like especially something like baseball, where it's not a contact sport, but we have pitchers that are undergoing and experiencing joint pain all the time. But you think about what they're doing, they're trying to throw a ball as hard as they possibly can 100 times in a game. And when you go to the extremes and you repeat the extremes, there's going to be some sort of a breaking point. And I think that oftentimes it is probably going to be joints. So you can try to work around that a million different ways by being smarter or anything else. But, professional baseball players have the smartest coaches in the world, best mechanics you could ever have. They're still going to experience that. There's always some bottleneck that you're going to run into. And I think that with resistance training, it oftentimes is orthopedic and joints.
Yeah, I think that was the eye-opening thing for me too. When I was covering, NFL and NBA, right? I would see guys. I remember seeing this one basketball player from Seton Hall, Marcus Toniel. He was like 38 years old, right? And I watched him run up and down on playground, just playing with a bunch of like retired guys, and he could barely run up and down because there is like a cost. You're right, to being any kind of elite athlete, and bodybuilders are elite athletes. So I think one of the interesting questions to me is like when guys are doing it more recreationally, right? How hard should they really push themselves? How hard should you really train?
Yeah, a lot of times I don't worry about it because if they were pushing themselves that hard, they would be reaching these elite levels.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it just becomes itself in a lot of ways. When you have someone as motivated as Arnold Schwarzenegger was for bodybuilding, he's going to do whatever it takes. He's going to push himself as hard as he possibly can and do more than what anyone else would do because the drive is there. You can't separate these things. So you can talk about smarter exercises, more orthopedically friendly. He's going to push those things as hard as they can be pushed, and we're going to find another rate limiting factor, another bottleneck, which again is probably going to be orthopedic in a different way.
The reality of it is I got banged up more actually by doing stunts. And, jumping around and flying off things and getting trampled by horses and all of this kind of the car accidents that you have when you do stunts.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, I think, about the stunts too, because it's when you think bodybuilding, right? It's like your body is prepared for all the forces that are coming at it. But stunts is a lot closer to sports because you don't know it's can your body handle a bunch of forces that you're not ready for.
Yeah, and I know the research on lifting weights is shockingly low for the number of injuries that happen. The most common injury is actually people dropping weights on their feet. So it's very unlikely you're going to get hurt lifting weights, but chaotic world of stunts, yeah, sounds about right.
A friend of mine, his wife was like 60 years old and she never did anything when it comes to sports. And she had a hip replacement. Maybe a hereditary kind of thing, who knows what. But I mean, she had a hip replacement. So, I think to be careful when you're 20 years old, you don't want to lift that heavy or you shouldn't do this or that. I think it's pretty much a waste. It's like when you go when you're a downhill skier. I mean, you cannot go and say, when in order to win, you have to go like 96 miles an hour. When you go to the Hahnenkamm race and you watch those races, well, the thing is that if you wipe out, you can get killed, or you can break every bone in your body. So, but you cannot go and say, well, I'm going to go only to 85 miles an hour, because then you're never even going to place in the top 40.
If you were competing nowadays and you had access to all of the new machines that everybody has and all the equipment, like, where I'm going with this is, do you think that there are any specific exercises that people should really watch out for? Or do you think that it's more about the individual themselves? I've heard Lee Priest mention that he thinks that you've been trolling everybody with the Arnold press, because he said he never saw you do that. And he thinks it's one that isn't great on shoulder health. I'm curious, like, if there's any validity to his thought on that. And if you think that there's maybe some exercises that people should avoid.
First of all, Priest was not around when I was competing. He was never at Coach Gym. So he does not know what he's talking about there. Okay, so I have no idea why he's always an expert. The only ones that would know are the people that trained with me, like Franco, Dave Draper, Frank Zane, Ken Waller, and those guys. And the shoulder press was one of my favorite exercises. We went up and down the rack, 5 times, and we started with 110s, then the 100s and 90s and 80s, and went down the rack to 40s. And then we did, ended up doing presses, and then did some laterals after that. So it was a really effective exercise, and it was effective because the pain, not in the joints, but the pain in the muscle was so enormous that I literally had to put the hand on top of something, to rest the shoulder, because I just couldn't let it just hang like that.
He was doing the Arnold press for the pain, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, pain is, on some level, pain is a good gauge for growth, even though it can create injury.
Yeah. Look, I think that there's always going to be solutions that we have to existing problems, but then they're going to present new problems. It's almost like you have a cobra problem, you bring in mongoose, they solve that, but now you have a mongoose problem. You solve for that, you got a new problem. The nature of progress is that you run into new issues that then need solutions. So there's never going to be this like absolute free lunch. Like, you can develop the most perfect physique or performance capabilities and nothing negative comes along for the ride. I think that being proactive and like thinking about what those potential bottlenecks and breakpoints are ahead of time is smart. And when you start to have some canaries in the coal mine start chirping, you have some pre-planned thoughts about how you can back off a little bit before you have a blinking red light danger situation.
That's what we are all looking forward to, right? How do you make it the most uncomfortable, and how can you make it the most painful? Because only when you have the pain, it grows, right? So we were looking forward to that. It was not kind of like we were shying away from it. But the thing you have to understand is that everyone is born with certain weak points. So someone could be doing light squats and his knees started getting destroyed. Someone else does heavy squats and doesn't feel anything in the knees. I know lifters today that ask in the gym, 60-year-old guys that are still deadlifting with 650 and that are squatting 8 reps with 500, 60 years old. And I look at them like kind of like they're like some world wonder of some sort, right? And I stand there and I'm watching them doing their lifts, and then I walk over to them and say, "Don't you feel anything in your knees?" Because my knees are hurting now. When I bicycle, sometimes I feel the pain from the squats and all that stuff. He says, "No." I mean, so he obviously was born with the different genes, and so it really, that's why it's very hard to answer that. Is there an exercise there's certain exercises that are very, very tough for the body. Like squats is a very, very tough exercise for the knees, but you have to do it if you want to make, or lunges.
Is there one exercise that you miss doing that you can't do anymore that you just wish that you could get back to doing?
Oh, many of them, like the press behind the neck, squats, the heavy deadlifts, incline press. I mean, there are several exercises like that. But I have to say that the technology has changed so much that now we have machines that are adjustable in such a way that when you want to do like a fly motion, you can set it down here and do your fly. You can say, okay, this hurts my shoulder. I'm going to raise it up a little bit. You can raise the seat up. You can move things around. I think that the machines, I'm so happy that we have now so many different types of machines for every part, for rear deltoids, for front deltoids, for side, for traps, for this, for that, for everything like that. Especially when you have an injury and you have to work around that injury.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting to the point you brought up about machines, right? Because I've always thought of machines as, maybe on some of our free weight lifts these days, we don't need to get as close to failure because that's about loading, to his point, mastering the basics, pushing the range of motion a little bit, right? And then when you get to machines, you can go a little bit more aggressively. And that to me has always been the safest place to push to failure, drop sets, rest pause, all those other principles, right? But I guess your point is also like when you have somebody like Arnold, he'll push the limits of those machines. Can you talk a little bit about how you trained around injuries and kind of the difference between good pain and bad pain? Because I think people very often don't. You tell them pain and they think they're going to pain and that's going to build the muscle. But when was the point where you would get to and say like, this is bad pain and this is something I can't train through?
Those days happen, especially when you talk about the forearm that ties into the bicep here, because you do chin-ups and this particular part is under stress. You do curls and it's under stress. You do reverse curls, it's under stress. You do flies, it's under stress. So it's like no matter what, you do pulleys, bend over rowing, it's always this part that gets hit. There were moments when I just said, I have to just, besides acupuncture and therapy, physical therapy, and just listen to the experts, and the therapist would say, I think you need to just lay off and let me just work on it for a week and don't do anything for a week. So it's no different than if you have surgery and you cannot train for a few weeks, right? So it's not the end of the world. I remember when I had my knee surgery, I couldn't do any squats for several months. But then when I did, it came right back again and I got right back into the groove.
If you had all the modern equipment they have now and you were able to train with that in your career, do you think you would have avoided a lot of the joint issues that accumulated over time?
The most important thing is that we always have to start out with the basic exercises. No matter what they have on machines, I would never go and say, don't do, the clean and the press. It is the greatest exercise. There's no machine that can replace that. Or a deadlift, or a squat, or bend over rowing, or bench press, or incline press, or press behind the neck. So, I mean, to me, I think the very fact that we have the barbells, I think that those exercises at the beginning are priceless. And I think that later on, when you have developed the mass and the basic structure, then you can go and spin off a little bit and start fine-tuning by saying, okay, I want to do this particular exercise for the rear deltoid, or I need a little bit of separation in front. Let me use these cables and stuff like that. So, I mean, you can do that, but to build the basic body in the beginning, I would never recommend to just use machines. I will always recommend to use just free weights.
Can you talk a little bit about your approach to training to failure, especially back then? You were talking about doing these big drop sets on Arnold's. And when you think about that, do you kind of, now a lot of the science is you don't need to truly go to failure. You need to get really close to it, but you don't need to truly go to failure. Build muscle. Do you ever wonder if there were sets going back then where like maybe you could have pulled back? And how do you think about going to failure for young lifters now?
I would never change anything that I did. I mean, I think that I figured out exactly what I needed to do. And of course, methods change. So today bodybuilders train a little differently. They don't do as many sets maybe that I did. But that's the only way I knew how to train. It could have been wrong. I mean, I don't know. Because I didn't have a second body to say, okay, let this one body do less sets and one more. We don't have that luxury. But I would say that to me, I just analyzed it very carefully. I said to myself, I need 5 sets of chin-ups for the width. And I need 5 sets of bend over rowing for the thickness. And I need 5 sets of narrow grip chin-ups for the lower lats. And I need, the cable, one-arm cable rowing and the T-bar rowing for the lower back and for the thickness and so on. So I just, all of a sudden I was doing 30 sets lats. But that's the only way in order for me to feel that I trained the whole back, the lower lats, the upper lats, the outside lats, the center lats, all of that. And then the pullover, for serratus to separate the lats out from the pectoral muscles and the intercostals and all that stuff. So you need all that stuff, I think. And today maybe they figure they don't need it. I don't know. I mean, it's like, that's just the way I trained. And I don't regret a set that I did too much.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you. It's great to talk to you guys always.
We really don't know. We live in this golden age of machines, right? And to your point, with the guys who are pushing themselves really hard, like a modern day Arnold,
Hadi Chupin, Derek Lunsford, Nick Walker, Samson Dauda, like those Derek are your top guys at the Olympia.
And we don't know what their injuries are going to be 10 to 15 to 20 years now.
Correct.
Like anytime you are pushing the limits of your body, like even though they are training smarter, we met Chris Bumstead maybe like 2 months ago, and I think he was coming off of a shoulder surgery. And that's, basically the modern day Arnold, right? The perfect physique. So it's like, no matter what, when you're building that mountain of muscle, there are going to be consequences to it.
You pull the covers back a little bit in almost every circumstance, and you find out the dirty truths behind the scenes. And the elite athletes that are pushing the boundaries of human performance, there's always going to be something that's a nagging thing, and a little injury, something is going to be popping up there.
So do you have any joint stuff? Because I've got like shoulder stuff. I feel like I've always got stuff. What's your stuff?
I'm going on 46, and elbows are like Arnold was talking about. I find elbows to be a recurring thing across the board, either inside or outside edge, and they're hard to deal with. Once they're there, they're kind of just lingering, and they're not easy to get to go away. You work around them as best you can, and sometimes they do shut you down.
That's the question, though. How do you work around? Because you don't want to quit training, right? How do you work? Right. What's your workaround?
So I have an order of operations that I follow. I try to stay with the same exercise, number one, but I make the exercise lighter and I go slower. If that doesn't solve for it, I try to stay within the same exercise family. I change the exercise a little bit to something very similar, and I go lighter and slow with that to begin with. If that's not working, now I kind of have to throw that whole movement pattern out and seek elsewhere for training stimulus.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my approach to kind of being banged up or injuries and joint stuff is very different from that. When a joint starts complaining to me, I think of that as kind of like nature's deload. And I'm like, okay, I'll work through it a little bit for like a week or two. And if it's not responding, I kind of ask myself, well, what are the other blanks in my training that I've been missing, right? And sometimes it's like focusing on a different muscle, still, getting my training stimulus, but I focus on a different muscle, or I find like a completely different idea. Like lately I've been a little bit banged up with like my elbow. So I've been running a lot more, right? And the way I see it, then I come back like 3-4 weeks later when I'm feeling better, and I'm coming back with like, a stronger cardiovascular system, which is going to help me in my lift. So I just get away from it and I take it as like nature's deload. But I think one way or another, the biggest thing we got from Arnold is the idea that, or the biggest thing we get from Arnold is the idea that one way or another, you want to keep training. And you want to keep pushing yourself because that's the heart of what we do. If you're not going to bother to push yourself, and there's risk in everything, like he said, there's a risk in a 60-year-old doing nothing who's going to have a hip replacement. So you might as well go hard.
Yes.